I thought we'd talk a bit about the United States military. You may have heard word that President Trump is going to do his best to make sure that all the troops are home from Afghanistan, perhaps others brought home too, because he promised to get us out of foreign entanglements and foreign wars. So some of you might be wondering, well, how is the United States military doing these days? I thought we'd talk about that with Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, who served America for 2 decades in the U.S. Marine Corps and is a senior research fellow for defense programs at the Heritage Foundation. How are you doing, Colonel? It's a pleasure to have you on the program, and thank you for your service.
Well, what an honor to be with you and to talk about such an important topic. So thanks for having me on the show.
So how are we doing? How is our military today? Because, Donald Trump made the point as he came in that it had been run into the ground by previous administrations, and he wanted to restore it as much as possible. Tell me how he did, and tell me how the military is doing, and what we need to get back to where we ought to be for this modern world.
Right. So in a short period of time, he made really good progress, but we need longer time, the same sort of focus. So it's actually a 30-year story. Collapse of the Soviet Union. Nobody really does anything with the military in the 1990s. Shrinks to half the size that it was when we were fighting the Soviets or against them. We have the September 11th attacks. And then the military is fully focused on counterterrorism operations and counterinsurgency in Afghanistan and Iraq. So we run them ragged for like 15 years, and the defense budgets were paying for that current operational posture, gas and bullets and bombs and blown up vehicles and all those sorts of things. So making it new or replacing old stuff bought in the 80s with new stuff that is relevant to today's battlefield was just ignored. So when Trump came into office, his team saw the condition of the military, said we can't dramatically expand it, very expensive, not enough time, but at least we can make what we have combat ready. And so the last 3 years or so have really been focused on improving the readiness of our current force. The bigger lift is going to be how do you get it larger, which it needs to be, and how do you really modernize it with all the new tools that it needs.
Okay, so just replacing what we, basically wore out or threw away, I mean, not threw away, but we used it, and the equipment was designed to be used, that's not going to be enough. We have to make a physically larger force. And, Colonel, I know there are going to be people out there saying, but we're a modern, the world has changed some,
right.
and there's certainly tools that are still useful today, and there are tools that maybe we have to rethink how we take things on. But what have we got now? About 2.1 million in all active duty and reserve serving in uniform right now?
Yeah, roughly that's about it. But a lot of that is back office. It's the Marines and sailors and soldiers and airmen that make the operational component what it is. And so when you look at the size of the world, that hasn't changed. In the Cold War, we had one competitor to the Soviet Union. Today, we've got Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. So you got more capable actors, and these actors, these countries, have more advanced systems. So the average age of a fighter plane used by the Air Force is 30 years old. Nobody drives a 30-year-old car. Over half of the ships in the U.S. Navy are greater than 20 years old. These things were bought 20, 25, 30 years ago. So we've used the equipment that we bought 2 or 3 decades ago at a very high level of employment because of current operations. So is the equipment good? Well, when you're going against terrorists with no Navy, no armor, no Air Force, we can do whatever we want to. But if you go up against a China who has 350 ships already compared to our 300, they're building their 3rd aircraft carrier. They have land-based anti-ship cruise missiles that are actually state-of-the-art. That's a different kind of fight. So the Air Force today is less than half the size it was back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And, it's just modern technology goes on. We don't use 2-pound cell phones anymore. You got your little pocket device. Modern cars today are just more sophisticated, more fuel efficient, more effective than something you would have bought 40 years ago. So I think we take our daily experiences and we apply those to the military, and you have a better understanding of what our young men and women have been using for the last 20 years. So we just really need to equip them properly.
Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood is with me from Heritage. So since we have a short period of time, what would it cost over, say, the next decade or two? Because you said this is a long-run kind of thing we have to do. What would it cost over 10 years or 20 years to bring us up to what would be appropriate to meet the challenges that we're up against today?
It has to be a slow, gradual build over time. If you wrote a blank check to the defense industry, making tanks, ships, or whatever, they couldn't spend that. You just don't have the people trained, the production lines. It just can't happen overnight. But you probably heard this 3 to 5% above the rate of inflation.
Yep.
That is an increase, the rate of inflation. Give me 3% more than that on a regular basis for the next 10 years, and it's a sustained, gradual climb, like climbing any kind of hill or road, right? Instead of going vertical, you'd much rather take something that you can handle. So it's that kind of rate. Today, we spend about 3% of GDP on the defense budget. Back in the Cold War days, for half a century, we spent 5%. That was average or normal. So we have gotten used to very low levels of funding that was effective because of the type of enemy that you were engaging. If you go up against a big country, you need Cold War level sorts of forces and the funding that goes with that. So $700 billion, huge amount of money, only 3% of the budget. It's below the rate of inflation. If you went to 5% on a $20 trillion economy, it's about $1 trillion. I don't think we need that much, but that would be below historical averages. And folks just haven't been explained, that that's the reality. And so any government coming into office is going to have to do a better job of explaining to the taxpayer what we need, what it costs, and how long it's going to take to get there.
All right, Colonel, let me ask you this. Are there places where we could say, well, these tools really worked well back then, but they don't work well at all today? And there are places where we can find some of the savings. I'm not saying don't increase the overall budget, but there are things where we can say, even the military has famous examples. Sure. I think the Sergeant York gun or one of those where they said this was a weapon we didn't want, shouldn't have been built, et cetera, but some congressman's district got a lot of jobs out of it. Are there some efficiencies we can find there if we actually listen to what the military says it needs?
You have to be more focused on the type of enemy and the environment that you're going to fight in instead of having a generalized force that is kind of good in a lot of areas. So the Marine Corps is dramatically refashioning itself. It says, look, if we're going to go up and serve the country, we have to be able to fight in a very contested environment against China. If we can do that, we can fight anywhere. That's a maritime environment, lots of islands and atolls and those things. They say tanks don't work there. So the Marine Corps is actually getting rid of all of its tanks, all of its heavy bridging units, getting rid of a lot of its old tube artillery that you would normally see on a battlefield, so that it can shift those resources to new types of equipment that are relevant and effective. So I think it's a brilliant move on their part. The Army has a different kind of fight, much longer ranges. It needs longer range rockets instead of standard artillery. It needs vehicles that are more nimble instead of an 80 or 90-ton tank. So firepower or mobile protected firepower is what they would call that in a different form. But modern sensors and modern anti-platform weapons are so good that you just can't fly a 1980 vintage airplane into somebody else's airspace and expect not to get shot down. So we need things like the F-35, which is the Joint Strike Fighter that's currently in production. Absolutely essential. And it's amazing how low they've brought the cost down relative to what was projected.